I say that knowing none of you will ever do that until you're way further along in your career. But so, however, if you're losing patients and you're well beyond the 6 weeks and there's no change in the status, it's okay to pick up the phone and ask, because journals and journal offices do make errors, and it could well be that they said they sent it out for review, but then actually don't have anybody signed up to be a reviewer, or the reviews are actually back in and they're sitting on the editor's desk for 2 weeks and the editor hasn't done anything. So, somewhere after the time they've said plus 50%, if that time has passed and you haven't heard from them, it's okay to either call or send an email, just gently inquiring about the status of the work. So, when all the reviews are back in, or as many of the reviews as the journal thinks it's ever going to get, then the whole packet, the reviews and the original article, go back to the editor, who's your advocate, the responsible editor. And it's really at this point, for the first time, that most editors will actually read your opinion. Remember, before they've looked at it and decided, gee whiz, this might be okay, I'm going to get it out of my stack into the review process. It's out of my mind, I don't have to deal with it. And then they don't have to deal with it until the reviews come back. Now, why do editors do this? It's a time saving. Okay, it's as simple as that. Also, it turns out to be much easier to read an article, particularly if it's in a field that you're not an expert in, when you have expert reviewers who make the comments on it. So, but it's at this point where the editor will sit down, read the article, make his or her conclusions about it, look at the reviews, and then decide what happens next. And there are really two decisions at most good journals. Either the responsible editor decides it's not going to meet the standards for the journal, and you get a rejection letter. Or, I think it's good enough for the journal, I'm going to present it at a meeting with the editors. And not all journals actually have meetings of editors where this happens. In some cases, this decision is sort of bypassed, and the responsible editor just makes a recommendation to the editor-in-chief. But all big journals have actual meetings where you sit down and present the articles. So each editor might have 5 or 6 articles that they think are potentially worth publishing, and they present them to the rest of the group. That's why I said they become your advocate, because they're trying to sell the article, which other folks have not actually read. Right? The other folks will have the abstract and the reviews, but they won't actually have time to read it. They certainly won't put anything in reference. So it's really then your editor's responsibility to try to sell the article. Sometimes those discussions go on for 20 minutes without a single article. So there's a back and forth about where some editors may agree or disagree. The outcome of this is you may actually get a summary of that. The editors discussed your manuscript. Several of them thought it was worth while publishing, but here are our concerns. You may actually find out what happened at that meeting, or you may not. Because what happens, what happens at that editors meeting is now the editors are the democratic body that's voting on articles. So if the discussion has gone really well, if the editor has presented it, everybody says, that sounds like a really good article, there won't necessarily be a formal vote. But if there's any controversy, there'll be a vote. And it's literally, if it's 4-3, they might look at each other and try and figure out whether they really meant to move it forward, whether they really need to reject it. But in general, it's done by consensus. So we've talked about some of these things, but it's at this point when you get back to the letter from the editors, either rejecting your article and closing the reviews, or indicating that they're interested in your article, but they have some concerns with it, that you, for the first time, you'll actually get some information to come privy to what they're thinking about your article. Now, if you get back a rejection letter, the most common response is after the extreme pain. It really is, it's a very unpleasant feeling to submitted your article, you spend 3 months in a journal, every day you've gone on the website 3 or 4 times a day to look, and you finally go on one day and there's a decision, and the decision is rejected. It is a horrible feeling. We all do this. We all think, oh, they've had it a long time, and I like it. Yeah, I've got an article to review. We do this. It's devastating. And all journal editors feel badly that we have to reject 9 in 10 of the article. Okay. But we talked about that the decision to reject is not based on what the reviewers thought, nor is the decision to accept an article. It's also, a lot of authors think, well, gee whiz, the reviewers had said there were 5 problems with the manuscript, but I could correct all of those. And if I could only correct those, maybe the editors would change their mind. So what you should understand is that the editors in their discussion have reviewed what they think are potentially correctable errors and have decided that even if the correctable errors are fixed, it's still not going to make it into the journal. Because if the editors think that the errors are correctable, they'll say so in the letter they write to you. We're interested in your article. How are these? There are 5 things we need you to work on. So that's another issue. And then, of course, it is, this last line is you will have this reaction if you have no idea, which is these people are idiotic. They don't get it. So, you have my sympathy for that, but it's not going to help you at all to pick up the phone and call the editorial office and accuse the editor of being useless. So, here's somebody asked a question about reading between the lines. Yeah, you did. So that comes into this middle category. It will be incredibly rare at this point in your career, or really at any point in your career if you're submitting articles to an important journal, that you actually, the first time your article's there, you will get back, we like your article so much we're going to accept it as is, or we'll accept it if you get rid of table 2 and turn table 4 into a figure. That's incredibly unusual. When that happens, you should really frame that letter. But it's also an indication, that you sent your article to a not sufficiently prestigious journal. That make sense to you? If the journal liked your article so much that they're just publishing it as is, it means you probably could aim higher. Okay. Sometimes the decision to aim lower is actually the right decision, but you should understand, if that happens, you could have gone higher. You're going to get a bunch of different messages from the editors. If you submit an article to the New England Journal, heard of that? What I call the New Brunswick Journal. You're going to get back, until the very last communication, a letter that starts telling you your article has been rejected. Followed shortly by, however, the editors are willing to reconsider a revised manuscript that deals with all the following. Now you might say this, why did they have to put that harsh language about being rejected? Because a journal like the New England Journal, they want to reserve the possibility of rejecting the article many times in the revision process. And they don't want you to think that the article has been accepted. So they're really clear, you've been rejected. But most journals at this point will give you a clue. The editors really liked it or interested in your article. It's several issues we want you to address. Sometimes you'll get language that says if you address these successfully, we will accept your article. More likely, you'll get back much less committed language. Now, this is where your mentor can help, because presumably they have already or know other people who submitted articles to the very same journal. And so they can look at the letter and help you understand, well, did they really like it and they're just being jerks? Or are they being nice to me and I have no chance of getting to accept it? This, as I say, different journals do this in different fashion. it's really important to understand that an article is not accepted. You can't write on your CV that it's in press until you actually have a letter from the editor telling you that it's been accepted. So even if you get a letter saying, we loved your article, there's a few changes we made, and then we'll accept it, it isn't accepted until you get that final letter. The good news, though, is once you get that final letter, unless the editors discover that there's something fraudulent about what you did, they will commit to publishing it even if you get sued. So this scoop has two directions.
So if you get to submit a revised version, does that go back up to all the reviewers, or is it just...
We're coming to that. I love these. So before we get to that, why might you get a very brief rejection letter? Like, why, if the journal kept the article for 3.5 months and sent it out to 4 reviewers, why do you get back a, thank you so much for submitting the article, we're on a, the editors have decided to reject the article or not to accept the article, good luck in your future career. All right. The basic reason is, usually there are many reasons why an article is rejected at this stage. And explaining them to authors just takes a lot of extra work. And it's not usually a useful exercise for the editors to do. And in some cases, the real reason they're rejecting it is probably not something you actually want to hear from the editors. Like, they spent an awful lot of time on an incredibly unencouraging and uninteresting question. And how many of you would like to get that frank letter from the editor? Thank you so much for your article. It's beautifully written. The tables were great. Too bad the question was really uninteresting. So, should you fight rejection? So this is the real rejection, not the rejection from the New England Journal where they say they'll reconsider it. A real rejection. My answer is it's almost never worth doing it. It is much easier to move on to another journal than it is to argue with the journal. It's incredibly tempting. Your mentors may, because they love you, tell you, gee whiz, you should really think about writing to the editor, or you should pick up the phone or something. They're going to be very supportive of you. That's not usually going to happen at all. Okay? So, remember, I covered, it's not just the things that the reviewers noted that need to be addressed. There's lots of other issues. The only way you can convince editors that they've made a mistake is if you have a really good reason. Like, in the previous version of the manuscript, we had 52 patients and our results were not statistically significant. In the 2 years while you've been deciding, we enrolled another 48 patients, and now the results are highly significant with confidence intervals from 16 to 22. Okay, that would be a good reason. And always remember that there were confidential comments to the editor. So even though the comments to you may have made that didn't seem like the reviewers liked your article, they may have said some very devastating things.
Sure. Is there a session that has a blacklist? Authors get on the blacklist?
Yeah, we used to have a blacklist, but it was very short. It was, there were, so, okay. There are a lot of crazy people in the world who submit articles to medical journals on a regular basis. Okay, so they're on the blacklist. There are a handful of pain-in-the-ass authors who, if they discovered, the secret of gravity, it would be worth working on. But it's a really small number. You're going to get rejected. Okay. Show of hands. How many of you think you're going to get rejected? Come on. Have you ever had an article rejected?
All the time.
Yeah. You got to get used to it. It's going to happen. It's going to happen all the time. It is a really hard thing for bright young people to accept. Okay? That something you've worked on, something you really like, somebody else doesn't value as much as you do. Okay. get right back on it. But don't just resubmit the same article to another journal. If there are comments from reviewers, you best address them, because the surest way to get your article rejected a second time is to send it to a journal, different journal, that sends it to the same reviewer who says, I just reviewed this article and they paid no attention whatsoever to anything I said, reject. And that is, by the way, an automatic ticket to get rejected. I mean, it's just, in fact, sometimes you know that'll be one of those really quick rejections. You don't even realize it's been sent out for review. So always deal with the comments of reviewers. If you decide a comment isn't important, then figure out how in the discussion to address why this particular concern is not. But it's really important not to ignore reviewers who are different journals. And usually you ratchet down a notch or two, right? So the New England Journal rejected your article without reviewing it. It's really unlikely that JAMA is going to wind up accepting it. Okay? If the New England Journal rejected it after 3 go-rounds, okay, maybe then JAMA would be interested. Does that make sense? Really, and learning where the ratcheting is something you get at the time. Yeah. I just like the way obsequiousness looks on the slide. It's such a great word, but it really, if you get a letter from the editor with recommendations made to you about how to revise the article, revise the article to the extent possible according to those recommendations, especially if they come from the editor. So if the editor says, I don't think figure 2 is needed, your response is, it's not needed. Figure 2 has been eliminated. Okay?
Thank you for this.
Thank you, exactly. We agree, figure 2 has been eliminated. Hard for you to do, just get used to doing it. Okay? Now, you should really separate the comments you're going to get. So that they'll come in, you know, you get the reviewers back, you get the editors, but you should really separate them into, I think, 3 categories. One is you actually need more data, more analysis. They ask for something that you can't just develop sitting at your desk. Well, you better get started right away on those. They take real time. Okay? If you're going to go back and look up tobacco usage in 200 charts, you better get going. Those are your highest priority. Lots of the suggestions are going to be in the category of rewriting, new tables, new figures. Those also take some time. The easiest thing is if you think is all you need is some more citations. They say, you didn't do a thorough literature review. Okay, great. Probably you did do a thorough literature review, but you left out the reviewer's seminal article on the topic. Okay. No, this happens all the time. So it gives you a clue that perhaps maybe you should go back and include a few more. But that's it. And when you write back to the editors, you have a beautiful cover letter where you list each comment. Comments of the editors, comments of reviewer 1, comments of reviewer 2, comments of reviewer 3, summarized, and how you're responding to it. How and where you change the manuscript. And Peter's right. It doesn't hurt to throw in, this was an excellent suggestion, it really clarified the message of the manuscript. I mean, reviewers and editors like to be told that they really want. And then the other thing is, before you send that manuscript back, read it as if it was a new manuscript. So the first time you submit the manuscript, you probably edited 100 versions of it, and it's perfect and pristine, and you really look at it carefully. By the time you're submitting it a second time, your attention level has diminished markedly. It's as if you're texting while writing. It's just so do everybody a favor and reread the manuscript well. If you disagree with something, okay, it's not every suggestion made by a reviewer or editor is going to be something that you agree with. It's fine to you've got to explain why. And the explanation can't be, the editor doesn't understand the field. If the editor didn't understand something, the correct response is, we were not clear in explaining how A causes B. Right? If the editor didn't get it, it means you were not clear. So keep that in mind. You can definitely say we can't do X. We can't go back and review 500 charts for tobacco uses because UC went on an electronic health record and all the old charts been shipped off to Berlin or whatever. Okay, that's reasonable. But it's not okay to write back and say we can't go back and collect data on smoking because we didn't have the time, or it would have been a lot of work, or those won't fly. So keep that in mind. You're often going to get a recommendation to cut your manuscript in half. Okay, in half. Don't argue about that. Just do it. It turns out to be much easier to do than you realize at this point. But if the editors say, you know what, we'll consider 2,500 words, they mean 2,500 words. They don't mean 2,750 or, as we used to get letters. The manuscript is now 2,500 words, leaving out the addition in the discussion which we put in response to the reader's group. That doesn't work. Yes?
Sorry, I wasn't sure if you're finished with that comment.
Yeah.
So for a lot of like statistical analysis, there's always this tension between reporting what's like truly statistically valid and reliable versus
Yeah.
what readers love to see, like
Yeah,
a lot of
yeah, yeah.
p-values.
I know.
So in that case, if a reviewer says, I want to see a p-value that you think might not be as meaningful or valid, like how much can you disagree? Like, can you just put that? Or, like,
Really good question. So, if it's something as specific as that, and you really think that, because you've been trained at UCSF, and you're into confidence intervals, not p-values, or whatever it is, whatever the soup du jour is. Then what you should do is, response back, we believe that confidence intervals are the appropriate way to present these data. For the reviewer and editor's interest, the p-value was, and just put it in the cover letter, not in the manuscript. So they know you're not trying to hide something. So what happens next? So now you've resubmitted your manuscript with a cover letter. This, by the way, takes almost as much time as writing the original manuscript. It's really a lot of work. So don't just say, oh, yeah, I'll get to it Sunday night. If you've done a really good job in the cover letter, the editor won't send it back for review. Okay. If you've answered every question and done really a brilliant job, it won't go out again for review. Except if, and there's a big exception, the editor does not feel like he or she is an expert in the field, and so can't really evaluate how well you responded. That makes sense? So sometimes the editors, knows it's such a subspecialized topic that they've got to get the reviewers. Almost all the time, reviewers will be asked, do you want to see a revised copy of the manuscript? Almost always, if reviewers don't check that box, it means that they think the manuscript should be rejected. So the reviewers always want to see it again. But editors are smart. They know the more time you send something out for review, the longer it takes, the more frustrated it gets, and there really is diminishing returns that happen pretty rapidly. The exception to this rule is once again the New England Journal of Medicine will send everything out for review 5 or 6 weeks. I'm only exaggerating slightly. They really, by the time they discover the manuscript, it is being reviewed multiple times. And it can be rejected at any point along the way. If it does go out for review, and they'll tell you that, post it on the website, hope for re-review. The worst thing that can happen is you get into this cycle of revising the revision of the revision. And it can just drag on forever. Particularly if you're in a fast-moving field, because then you have the problem that there may be new science that's happened since the time you submitted. That's why I said early on, an early rejection is not so bad, because this is the worst outcome, where you've got a manuscript that's with the journal for 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, and you're not really sure what it's going to be. So the easiest way to avoid that is to put a lot of effort into that first revision to try to avoid having it go out multiple times. Okay. Was there a question? Or? Okay. So after it's finally accepted, okay, now, as gut-wrenching and horrific as the feeling is when you click on the bar and you see that it's been rejected, okay? Clicking on the bar and seeing that it's been accepted is an incredibly positive feeling that makes everything else worthwhile. I promise you, okay? It is such a thrill to see your first article, your second article, your fifth article, your first article in a really prestigious journal accepted. I mean, it's really a great feeling. We underestimate how important that is to convincing people actually to stick with your show. You need that dopamine rush that you will get. And it is totally okay if you get an article accepted, close the website, walk around the room and go back and open it again. And then call some people and do it 3 or 4 or 5. You get a little less dopamine each time, but there's still just enough left. And it's such a good feeling. All right. But after it's accepted, it's out of your hands, it's with the editors. Some, especially the larger journals, will actually then edit your article. Literally edit it. Like either the editor edits it or a copy editor edits it. Language for clarity, simplify your tables and figures. And that process usually takes about a month. And then you'll get a revised version for you to look at and make sure that the edits are acceptable to you. Eventually you'll get what are called page proofs, which is essentially the PDF of what the article is going to look like before it comes out. At these points, okay, when you get back the edited article, if they've made a really egregious error, now's the time to let them know. Once it's in PDF format, they've already started figuring out how many pages it's going to take up in the journal and where it's going to fit. And big changes at this point just make everybody unhappy. So really try to avoid it. They'll tell you that. You'll get a letter that says, at this point, please correct only factual errors and limit yourself to X, Y, and Z. That's what they're really doing. Most journals are on a really tight schedule, so the material has to go from the editor to the publisher, and there's usually only a few-week lag between those processes. So if you slow the process down, what it will often mean is your article gets bumped backwards to the next edition of the journal. Yeah, you've all read really bad articles, presumably in good journals, and you wonder how that happens. Here are the reasons, okay? Okay, we make mistakes. The process of evaluating journal articles is very imperfect. It's a small world. Just to say, editors know authors, and if it's sort of a toss-up, you might do your friends a favor and publish the article, particularly if you know they're working on something else they want to send to you. That's another reason. Times change. By the time an article is published, 2 years after the whole submission process started, it may have been preempted by 4 or 5 other things. This one, better and better, but still not good. Okay. The editors have been working with you, and it's getting better and better. It's still not very good, but they realize this is as good as it's ever going to get, and they feel for you. So instead of actually making the decision, it's not worth publishing, they'll just publish it. They'll do it for you. And then finally, the most important reason is this one: publish or perish. Right? Everybody's got to be published, so there've got to be journals that will publish the worst 10% of all articles that are published. Right? That's a definition. It's sort of like telling people you graduated with the bottom 10% of your medical school class. Did any of you go to a medical? You're all here, right? So is there anybody in the bottom 10% of your class? No, really. How many? No, you do know, 10%. But, I mean, obviously we don't publicize this, but it is true. So given the numbers of articles that people are writing, and all of them eventually, or most of them eventually get published, a lot of them are really marginal involved. What's surprising is when you see a marginal article in a good journal, and that's one of the things. What are we doing for time? We're just about out of time. Okay, so you'll have to invite me back if you want to hear the other half of the talk, or about statistics, or about anything else. So thank you for your attention. I hope this is worthwhile.
Nicole, you
Any
have
more
a question?
questions?